Hey, Carol, guess what?
What?
I met a client on Friday who loves zinnias even more than I do.
Is that possible?
It is. She had at least 30 packets of seed that she showed me, and she had already sowed a ton of seed outdoors. Her garden is going to be beautiful this year.
It is. If she sows 30 packets of zinnia seeds, that's going
Yeah.
to be amazing.
I don't think all 30 will get done, but she's already sowed a bunch. How about we move on to the episode?
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Garden Angelist, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma, and I garden on 1.5 acres out of 7.5 acres in the country.
And I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana. I have a suburban garden measured in square feet. It's about 1/3 of an acre.
We call ourselves Garden Angelists because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening, and we want you to love it too.
Yes, we do. And we aren't afraid to spill the beans and tell all of our gardening secrets, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. But that's enough of who, what, when, where. Let's move on to this week's episode. Hello, Dee.
Hello, Carol. How does your garden grow?
It grows well, Dee. We are actually recording this podcast on the week that it's going to come out. So I have finished planting 90% of the containers. I've got just a few miscellaneous things like that sun coral candy coleus that we started from seed.
I still got to plant mine. Mm-hmm.
So I ended up with 13 seedlings. I preciously gave one to my sister. And then Ball Hort sent me 2 to trial. So now I'm back up to 14 seedlings.
I have 5, and that's plenty. I gave half of mine to Jan, client and friend. So, and a listener of this podcast. So I gave it to her. They're still, the ones I started from seed, they're still tiny. I don't even know where to put them.
Mine are tiny, and I think I know what I'm going to do with them. I've got this old-fashioned wheelbarrow that has pansies in it right now, and it's now in the shade and sun. So I thought I'm just going to throw them all in there and have them duke it out.
That sounds good. I like that idea. So what else have you been doing?
Well, the vegetable garden is all planted except for the flowers. Those are going to go in today, zinnias and sunflowers, but tomatoes, peppers, green beans, squash, all that's been planted as of yesterday. My sister's condo, we've got that all planted. I've got the neighborhood entrance planted up, part of it. I'm going to put some more flowers up there. I've been picking lettuce, pulling out spring onions and the first strawberries. And right outside this front window, that Bartzella peony, the most beautiful yellow bloom you've ever seen. It's all good.
I saw it on your Instagram.
That was before it fully opened. I mean, it just gets prettier and prettier every day.
So you're going to have to send me a picture of it. I killed Bartzella, so I can't have it. I decided.
Oh, just killed it once?
Okay. Only once, but
you remember the rule of 3. Always buy 3 of the plant and let it be killed 3 times before you give up. Rule of 3.
Back then, Bartzella was really expensive, and I bought one. Yeah. Now she's not. Isn't she like $19 now? But
no, she's still expensive. But I bought mine at Costco, and so I've been inventing reasons to go to Costco like every 3 or 4 days to see if they got any in this year. And my neighbor wants one if I get one, and he asked me if I would check because he had to go to town. And I was talking to his wife, and she's like, did you ask somebody if they're actually going to get them versus do you keep going in there?
You're like, no, it's just fun to go in there, right?
But I found this beautiful hosta called Dancing Queen, which has a yellowish foliage, which is going in with my theme out front in kind of a shaded area. So I got that for like $16.
Good for you.
It's in a big, like almost a 2-gallon container. It's a big hosta. Tell me about your garden, Dee. Enough about mine.
I think you're in the midst of the initial excitement, when you first can get out there and just have a blast. I'm at another stage. My stage is I am doing the editing in the garden, and I hear our friend Marianne Newcomer's voice in my head the whole time I am pulling stuff out, because she's like, editing in the garden is the most important thing you do. And she's right, because I have some asters that are total bullies and they're trying to take over. And, I love goldenrod, but the goldenrod is trying to beat up on some roses I have, Lady Shallot roses. So I got to do some more of those. So I did all that on Saturday. Saturday, I worked all day, and then I planted the rest of my containers on the deck. I still need to plant a couple of pelargoniums that I was sent by Doom and Orange. And I bought some terracotta pots for those. Really nice terracotta pots. And I'm like,
Of course you did.
why did you spend money on this? This was ridiculous. You already have terracotta pots, but these are really pretty. They have a Provence edge.
So you got free pelargoniums to try, but that means you had to buy a bunch of, never mind.
This is why I work. Okay. And then I'm also pulling out Rebecca Goldstorm still. I'll be pulling out until the day I die. And I deadheaded my roses. And I actually did a video. I did a couple of videos on Instagram. I've only published one. And it was about deadheading and how simple it is and how people get all kind of wound up about it. So if people want to go do that, we can link to it in the newsletter and in our show notes. And I'll get the link.
Yeah.
Because I'm writing the newsletter.
We're only going to link to it in the newsletter. And that way it'll entice people to go to subscribe.
Newsletter. Okay, perfect. So I'm doing the newsletter this week. And let's see, the garden smells of roses and peas and beautiful things.
That sounds nice. I did want to make a comment. I planted up my Rise Up Amberness roses. I wanted the 3 in front.
Yeah, how'd they do?
Well, they're planted up. They were small when I got them because they were only in quart-sized containers, but that's all I could find. But we shall see. The funny thing was I went out the day after I planted, and the one, somebody dug it up and it was laying there.
I've had a lot of that this year.
I'm just like, oh, are you kidding me?
And squirrels,
raccoons, chipmunks, somebody didn't like it. And I'm like, no, it's going right back.
I had the same thing happen when I went out there on Saturday. I was like, really? You had to knock over the Jolt dianthus and spill out all the dirt in the pot? Thanks so much.
Yes.
Well, on that note.
Well, we want to mention this week too, you're doing your editing. And so you'll be doing your Chelsea chop pretty soon. All right.
I'm already started. Yeah, I'm chopping.
I'm still a week away, a week or two.
Yeah.
But it is Chelsea week over there in the London, England.
Yeah.
And so my Instagram feed is full of videos and pictures from the Chelsea Garden Show, which is in full swing.
And I think this is a good opportunity to tell people that gardens are all about manipulation. And you manipulate those plants to do what you want them to do. I mean, at first, you're just trying to keep them alive. And then over time, some of them decide that they want to take over and other ones don't want to stay. I mean, I don't, everybody knows that I'm not a topiary fan. And yet I love Sunshine ligustrum as a topiary. So it's time to shear back that. It's time to do the Chelsea chop. There's just things I do, like around some of my roses, I have phlox, paniculata, garden phlox. I take that down a little bit too, because I want the rose to shine right now. And I don't need those to shine yet. All right.
We'll talk more about that in our commissions. I'm going to do a quote.
Good.
While we extend our admiration to all flowers, trees, and shrubs in our possession, we shall derive large gratification and advantage knowing everything there is to be known, the nomenclature, the botanical distinctions, the culture of some particular species or family of plants. And that is by Dean Hole. And we have done that quote before, but it is fitting today.
Definitely.
And Dean Hole is actually Dean Samuel Reynolds Hole, an Anglican priest, author, and horticulturalist from the 19th century over there in Great Britain. Which brings us to our flower.
Yes, irises.
Not just irises, bearded irises is what we're going to talk about because
right.
Irises is a big genus, as we'll find out. But before we do that, Dee, we have to circle back and talk about society garlic.
Apparently so, yes. You go ahead.
So we got an email or comment from a listener, Donna B., who's out in Southern California. She's in zone 10 at home and she has a rental in the desert in zone 8. She says we gave a very disappointing assessment of society garlic and that where she is, it is a very low maintenance workhorse.
Yep.
Green, blue plants and several variegated varieties. They're evergreen, though they don't bloom in the winter months. She says they can be prolific bloomers in spring, summer, and fall. They don't really spread, but they do multiply.
Mm-hmm.
Easily split off. She compared them to a daylily. She has some plants that are as large as 3 or 4 feet across, but generally they take up a foot by a foot. She says they do have a slight garlic smell, but it's not something that you're going to just go around the garden saying, who's cooking? But anyway.
I think this is a really good example of how climate makes all the difference.
It does.
I don't live in zone 8 or 10. I live in zone 7A, and you live in zone 5, 6. Yeah,
6A.
And so it just doesn't shine for us the same way it does for Donna. And I'm glad that she wrote us to tell us how well it does in Southern California, which I love Southern California. It's a fun place to visit. I think it would be hard for me to garden there. I would not be a very good transplant.
It would be a whole new learning curve for us. But anyway, we wanted to do that circle back and thank Donna for that lovely comment. So if you're in one of those areas, do give Society garlic a chance.
Give it a chance here if you want to. I say, grow whatever you want to grow as long as it's not invasive.
That's right. Now we can talk about the bearded irises, which is hybrids of Iris germanica. Mm-hmm. So the other common name is German iris.
Mm-hmm. And flag irises.
And flag irises, or some old timers just say the flags are blooming. I'm like, what?
Those are usually the old ones, the ones that were very narrow petaled and the original ones. Now bearded irises are so big and floriferous and bearded.
They are. And the name Iris is the same as the name of the Greek goddess of the rainbow, and perhaps a nod to the wide variety of colors of flowers found in this genus. And I've heard that in the iris and the bearded irises, you can get any color you want. Any color you want, Dee.
I think you can now. And if you want blue plants, something that flowers blue, irises are an excellent choice, at least in my climate. And they grow like gangbusters in Oklahoma, especially if you don't mulch them too heavy.
Yeah, they grow well here.
One of my problems is keeping the mulch away from them because, as you have written next in our information, you want to plant them right at the surface of the soil, just below. You want that rhizome even to show. And the happier they are, the bigger the clumps get. But if they're not happy, if they get water, also don't put the drip irrigation right on them. They don't like a lot of irrigation. They'll take it during the spring, but in the summer, they want to be hot and quite dry, is my experience.
That is true. And we should mention, they are hardy zones 3 through 9. So that pretty much is everybody, unless you're in Southern Florida or maybe the desert or Southern California. Yeah. But the rest of us, we're growing irises.
I mean, they're easy. And in fact, the same client that I saw on Friday, she was growing them. She was like, I'm not sure why these aren't blooming well. I said, they're in too much shade. They want full sun. I said, see those rocks over there? Because she had some sandstone. She actually lives very close to me. So she had sandstone like I do. And it was sitting over in her lawn. And I said, you see those rocks? That little bare area around them? Those irises would love those because they'll get the reflected heat off the rocks. They will get, that sandy soil, which they love. They'll have full sun. They will be happy.
They will. And so we should point out that the iris is so beloved that there is, of course, an American Iris Society. We'll link to them. Yes. And they have all the cultural information you would ever want to have.
Yes. And I think on last week's Oklahoma gardening episode, the president of our local Iris Society, it may be Oklahoma City Iris Society, Michael, he gave an interview. And if I can find it, I will put a link in our newsletter because he knows everything there is to know about irises.
In my garden, I have a blue iris. I don't know where I got it. It's over on the side. I have a blue and white iris. And then my sister has a really pretty yellow one. And she's like, I got to get rid of this. It's going everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's just a bigger and bigger clump. So I dug up some of that in the spring and brought over here, and it's doing okay. But when do we dig and divide our irises, our bearded irises, Dee?
Well, here we do it in July.
And we would do it in July and August here as well.
They're dormant, and it's just a good time to transplant them. They're one of the very few plants that I can think of that wants to be transplanted in the middle of summer.
That is true.
I mean, you can plant them now. I've planted them in spring, ordered them. But the problem is in spring is you'll get torrential rainfall like we did last 2 weeks. We had 6 inches, and it kind of drowns them. So you want to be sure and plant them when it's good and hot and dry, and just water them in, plant that rhizome at the top, make sure the roots are underneath the soil, makes them happy.
Yes. And now, we have to, I found, I looked for iris on your blog, Dee, while you were out of town.
Mm-hmm.
And
I see that.
So the first post I found was why you aren't a big fan of irises, but I'll let you find another one if you want to, but.
So that whole post was not why I'm not a fan of irises. I went back and read it. That post was from 2015, and it was a post on the beauties of May, which were roses, peonies, and irises, right? And in it, there is one paragraph where I say, I'm not a huge fan. And it's not that I don't think they're beautiful. I do. What happens in my garden every time the irises bloom for their very short season?
Well, usually a big torrential rain comes and knocks them all down to the ground, so they're not so pretty anymore.
Right. And so I don't get to enjoy them. But since that time, what I do is, if I'm in town, is I just go out there and I cut them all. If I know there's a big torrential rain coming, I cut them and bring them inside. And I grow them now because of my mother-in-law. I miss my mother-in-law, and she passed on in 2011. And she was a huge fan of irises. In fact, she bought me my first membership to the Oklahoma City Iris Society. So I planted a whole section of irises down in the garden with Lady of Shalott roses, and they're antique irises and they're purple. Now, they aren't in their full glory days yet,
right?
But, in a few years they will be, as long as I can keep the mulch off of them.
Not to put a damper on irises, because we do like them, and they're falling down there's a remedy to that. But there are a couple of other problems. One of them is the iris borer.
Yeah, it's a problem.
And that gets into the roots and can destroy the plants.
They can. And they also have fungal diseases. So anytime you find either of these things, you can toss the ones that are affected. And if you have an area, and I'm just saying this off the top of my head because I don't really have an iris borer here, but if you have them, what I would do if I found them in a particular area and they were a huge problem, I'd move my irises that weren't affected away from that area, because people tend to grow irises kind of together.
And the American Iris Society probably has another solution, because I've heard of people dipping their rhizomes in a diluted bleach solution to kill off
bleach solution
and then replanting. Mm-hmm. But I think moving to another location is a good idea.
It's just a thought. Also, they have fungal diseases, crown rot, mosaic virus. I'm going to refer everybody over to the Iris Society for that. I don't grow them seriously enough.
I don't either.
To know. I'll say this, don't mulch them. If you don't mulch them, you'll have a lot less trouble with crown rot.
That's true. And speaking of mosaic virus and botrytis blight, mm-hmm. I have a really pretty blue iris that's blooming very nicely. Mm-hmm. But I was kind of looking, and I've got some stuff on the patio, so I can't get over close to it. I need to get over close because I think a couple of the buds didn't open up, mm-hmm. which makes me think that I've got botrytis blight or something on those. So I need to give a closer inspection thereof.
Yeah, and just see what's going on. I don't know. I think the biggest issue is don't water them overhead, which there's a lot of plants that don't like overhead watering. And so I would
But that's rain, Dee.
Well, that's called rain, yes, but you don't have to add to it with sprinklers. It is always better to water from the ground up. It's always better.
I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I know.
So we don't want to end up on this sour note of, okay, irises are great, but here are all these problems. We should note that irises are one of those very fragrant flowers that people enjoy the scent of.
They are. They smell delicious and they're beautiful. And I have on that post that you showed, I have a picture of one of my favorites, which is Backdraft, and it was hybridized by a guy in Oklahoma named Hugh Stout, who's an iris hybridizer and daylily hybridizer. And it's gorgeous. It's purple and orange, and it's just beautiful. So there you go. Let's end on that note.
Well, my blue one smells like grape Kool-Aid.
I have one that smells. Does it have variegated foliage?
No,
mine does.
I drive by this house that has some with variegated foliage. Mm-hmm. I'm of a mixed opinion on those.
I love mine, and it smells like grape Kool-Aid too. All right, let's move on.
Oh, okay. All right. You get the next quote. That is the iris, the bearded iris.
If you've never experienced the joy of accomplishing more than you can imagine, plant a garden. That's by Robert Brault. And Carol has researched him, and he's an American author.
According to Amazon book listing that he's got, this is a guy I've never heard of. Every 7 minutes, every day, someone in the Twitter world tweets a Robert Brault quote. Author, contributor to magazines, newspapers in the U.S. for over 40 years.
Well, good for him.
I had never heard of him. His book is Round Up the Usual Suspects, Thoughts on Just About Everything, including apparently gardening.
So we're going to talk about vegetables. And Carol wanted to talk about evolution of our vegetable gardens, which is kind of fun because for people who are new to the podcast, they might not know.
Well, the important thing to know is that a vegetable garden, you have to evolve it every year. It's never going to be the same one year to the next.
Right.
And so I will say I grew up with my dad rototilled the garden every spring and then would form new rows every spring. And that was the way he did it. And he mixed in all kinds of leaves and things in the fall. And as they say, and you can say it with me, Dee, that's a lot of work.
Well, that's what I was sitting here thinking. I was thinking about how hard that would be.
Well, and everybody did it that way.
I did it that way.
The neighbor and he actually owned the tiller together. And so I don't think they ever had any fights about who got it on the first nice dry day of spring, because you also had to kind of find that dry day of spring when you could get in there and till.
Well, and now they tell you not to till at all.
I know.
Because tilling destroys the microbiome. But at the time, it was considered the way to do it. And you also tilled between the rows, remember? Yeah. That's how you did your weeding. I had a tiller. I had a little tiny mantis tiller, and the Bermuda grass laughed at it. It would wind itself up in the tines, and it was just a nightmare. And so I went to raised beds. What did you do?
Yeah, my first real garden my first house, I put one where I rototilled, and then the second house, I went to a raised bed with wooden sides, though.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, Bill would till mine up with the tractor once we got a tractor, once we could afford one. And so we had a tractor and he did that. And we tried the little tiller. That didn't work. And then finally one day I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And actually the last time I had an in-ground vegetable garden, just in just a plot of in-ground, was the year before I wrote my book. And that would have been 2013 because the book came out in 2014. So there are pictures of my old vegetable garden in there. But I had a vegetable garden before that was kind of a raised bed one because I copied the one out of Kitchen Gardener magazine. So my back garden was, and you put some pictures, I think, on the last newsletter.
I did.
My back garden, which is now a giant perennial and flower garden, was originally a vegetable garden too. So my first vegetable garden was where Bill's mobile home was before we met, and we tilled it up. I've moved it around over the years. Now it's the potager and containers. Things change.
Right. And when I started a vegetable garden here, I did raised beds with cedar boards, and those do eventually rot.
Mine are rotting.
And so once they were rotted, then for 1 year I had just like a tilled garden, which was a big mess. Mm-hmm. That was the year you saw it, by the way.
It looked pretty good, Carol, but it did have a lot of tomatoes on the ground, but it was the end of tomato season.
Yeah, it was the center aisle, and then it had rows. And so I started calling it the Vegetable Garden Cathedral.
Right.
Because it's like
the church.
So then the next year I paid some people and I got the edging blocks from Menards, which you don't have, but for people in Indiana from Menards, they're like 4x8, no, 3x8. I was going to measure them. They're long and stacked too high, and they make great beds. And I straighten them out every once in a while, but they've been out there for 12 years.
So my potager has been out there since 2009 because I went and looked it up. And mine is made with concrete blocks too. And they came from Delisi. Delisi had a retail center. That's a concrete company here. And they may still have it. It was down off of Sunny Lane on the south side. And we went and picked them out. And I had some bricks that were left over from a paving job. Everything in my garden is left over from paving jobs because most people don't know this. But when you're a paving contractor, the stuff that you haul away by law, you own. Isn't that crazy? It's because nobody wants to pay to haul stuff away from a job site. So contractors will haul it away. And then if you're us, you reuse it. And a lot of contractors do that. They not on other jobs, but they might reuse it, at their office or whatever. So that's what we did. That's why I've got River Rock as my sidewalks out in my garden, which I always tell people because people want River Rock. And I'm like, no, you don't want River Rock. You want decomposed granite because River Rock slides down your hill. Those are the round pebbles.
Yep.
DG kind of knits together. So anyway, back to gardening and vegetable gardening. It's all, my change.
Yeah. My paths are now, they're landscape fabric, which is starting to tear up and I hates it.
I do too.
So I'm thinking about, I don't know what I'm thinking about. But anyway, I've got a bunch of wood chips from my brother-in-law's hobby of carving bowls and things. I got 3 big bags of it. And I thought I might just strengthen all that or make sure that fabric is really pinned down good where it's coming up and then spread some of that. It'll look nice and it wouldn't be a disaster, to have to rake it up and compost it into something else.
Well, a lot of people take it after it's, if it's composted, they take it and they throw it in the beds. Nan Andre used to do that. And then she started taking her alpaca. Doesn't she have alpacas?
Yes.
I always get alpacas confused with the other animal. She takes their wool, their alpaca wool, and she lines her beds with it. So there's a lot of different things people do to make this stuff work. So
the important thing is we would like to tell people is A, we are huge advocates of raised beds, and B, nothing ever stays the same in the garden.
No. Right now I have raised beds in the potager and I have raised beds for my cut flower garden. And eventually those will rot. It'll take a long time, but they will rot. And now there are those new, I think are they called Vigo, or is that what you're talking about with the metal containers?
Well, they're all over the internet. There's several different brands that you can buy, and they're shipped in pieces. You have to kind of screw the whole thing together, but they're those big corrugated metal vegetable garden raised beds in an instant. And
don't you think?
Yeah. And a lot of them have a green outside instead of just that plain silver. So that's a nicer look to me than just the plain silver. But
yeah, I like the plain silver too. And you actually have some photos from a tour you were on where you showed the plain silver. And it's actually, I use it in my vegetable gardening talk. You gave me some photos. It's a garden in Indiana. I was going to say, I think that those all came out of the metal stock tanks because that became a thing.
Yes.
And so now they have these ones you can put together and they're pretty. They have kind of an enamel coating on them. Heather here, She Grows, has them, and she has a video on Instagram where she put them together. I think they're attractive. I think that you're probably going to want to do, soil is expensive. Raised bed soil is not cheap, even if you buy it by the dump truck load. And so you might want to do, what is that stuff called? Hugelkultur. Is that right?
Hugelkultur. My sister's done that. You put all the rotting wood and stuff down in the bottom and then use that as a filler. The thing is, that's gradually going to sink down and you have to add more.
I have to do that every year anyway. Yeah. Every year I add a little more soil.
She has a strawberry bed that she planted in one of those and it's kind of sunk down a little bit. And I said, leave it this year. And then probably next year you'll have to dig up your strawberries, add more soil and then replant.
Sure. That makes sense to me.
So now you brought up a fancy word like hugelkultur. So you'll need to find a link for the newsletter for that too.
Well, we talked about it a little while back too. So,
Yeah.
and it was the first I heard of it.
Find it.
And then it was everywhere. Like every client I had wanted to talk about hugel culture. And I'm like, you can do it one of two ways. You can use hugel, however you say it, hugel culture, or you can do the raised bed soil. I did raised bed soil, which I bought from Menic Materials. But anyway, I digress. Let's go on.
Here's a quote. Books are the treasured wealth of the world and the fit inheritance of generations and nations. Henry David Thoreau from Walden.
On the bookshelf, Carol has a book for us this week. It's called American Wildflowers, a literary field guide, edited by Susan Barba, illustrations by Leanne Shapton. And the book won a book award from the American Horticulture Society this year. And so you checked it out of the library. Tell us about it.
I did. And so it is quite the interesting book. I'm holding up the picture.
It's beautiful.
So you can see what the illustrations are. I think I'll call them watercolors is what they are. Very interesting. They're more impressionist watercolors, I would call them. They're not great detailed. But this is an interesting book. And when you if you go to the American Horticultural Society's website, I think this is in the public viewing part. The judges have some interesting comments that this is not your typical quote unquote how-to gardening book.
Right.
And I'll tell you what the author has done. She calls this a florilegium.
Let's say that again.
Which florilegium.
Okay, what the heck is that?
The Latin word for a gathering of flowers.
Okay.
And so instead of gathering flowers, I'll quote here, I have been gathering stories about them, which are also stories about who we are and our relation to place. It is a book about nature and culture. It includes both native and non-native species, pristine and rambunctious definitions of nature. It acknowledges the ways in which wildflowers are both threatened and resilient. And so she has letters, reviews, bulletins, essays, excerpts from novels, reports from the field, and most of all, poems. She has included all kinds of people. She has listed some of her criterion stuff. And there are writers from the 1700s to 2020 in here.
Cool.
And then in the back, she lists all the different writers. So like poems by Emily Dickinson, which would be the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's got Ross Gay, who's also a poet. And his poetry book is called The Book of Delights. And I may hear more about him because he's actually in Indiana at Indiana University. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I have not.
But he's a current poet. And Yule Gibbons, you remember good old Yule Gibbons?
Hickory nuts.
Even pine cones are edible.
Yeah.
And then William Bartram.
Yeah, Bartram. Yeah, Bartram's
famous explorer from this.
He's considered the first nurseryman. And
so it's interesting. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, who we heard speak in Buffalo.
Yeah, Sweetgrass.
Very, very, very interesting speaker.
She's a really
anyway. It just speaker. Goes on and on and on. Yeah, Meriwether Lewis from the Lewis and Clark expedition. I'm just kind of rambling off some of these. And Catherine S. White was in there.
Love Catherine White.
From
E.B.'s wife.
What's the name? Yes, E.B. White's wife. So anyway, it's quite the book. And if you are into literature, if you're into poetry, she's got in from all kinds of different stuff that she's pulled out of here. And so it is a very fascinating book.
Cool. Sounds like a lovely gift book.
It is a lovely, lovely gift book.
Want me to do the next quote?
Yes, please.
Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, stay a while. That's from one of our favorite poets, Mary Oliver.
Well, let me see if Mary Oliver's in here. Hold on a second.
Oh, Mary Oliver is in that book. There's no way that she's not.
Well, you never know. We just have to verify.
How could you not have Mary Oliver in there?
We have to verify. I'm still looking. Hold on. Well, she's not included.
Oh, well, that's too bad. All right, let's move on to the dirt.
Well, she probably didn't write about a specific plant. You had to write something about a specific plant or conjure up the image of a plant. That's right. Probably
she was more of a poet. All right, so you found our dirt. It's a Kickstarter campaign for a new game called Botany: Flower Hunting in the Victoria Victorian era, which kind of fits back in with that book too. And so I guess their goal for the Kickstarter campaign was $5,000. Now tell how much they raised.
Well, when I last looked, they've raised over
Good
$500,000.
for them.
And so I went ahead and pledged so I could get this game.
Oh, blame you. I would love to have that
And
game.
every time they get to a new level of funding, then they add something free into your game pack. So
Fun.
they're not shipping until March 2024, but you can already go out to YouTube and see people playing a prototype of the game and giving it reviews.
That is really cool.
It does look like a pretty cool game. And they also have a way that you can play just with yourself and the internet. I think they have an internet option.
It's back to that AI stuff again.
Yes, because I can't imagine who would play with me.
Well, that's what I was thinking. When I was looking at it, because, you sent me a picture of it, I looked at it and I thought, oh, that looks fun. And I go, well, who's going to play that with me except Carol? I guess we could play like through Zoom.
That's true. And anyway, it does look very fascinating. And then they have spent a lot of time, I think, with the look of the game and the quality of the graphics and things. And
it looks good.
So it does look pretty good. And so anyway,
and it'll even be better now because they've got $500,000.
Oh yeah.
To produce it.
Well, they owe a lot
impressive.
of people. They owe a lot of people copies of the game. So, because I think the retail is going to be like $65 or something like that. It's not going to be a cheap game. But then I don't play tons of board games, so I have not gone out and priced board games, I will admit.
It just depends on the game, but usually they're not $65 unless it's a huge role-playing game. But anyway, it sounds wonderful.
All right, I'm going to do the next quote. We might pass violets looking for roses. We might pass contentment looking for happiness. Sir Bernard Williams. I looked him up, and here's all I'm going to say is he's a moral philosopher from the
70s, 80s.
Yeah, he died 90s. In 2003. And he was a professor in Cambridge and also at University of California, Berkeley. And the quote about him says, one of his mentors said, he understands what you're going to say better than you understand it yourself and sees all the possible objections to it and all the possible answers to all the possible objections before you've got to the end of your sentence. Sounds like he just didn't let you get a word in edgewise.
It kind of does. But I do love that quote.
It is a very good quote.
It's beautiful. That was in front of your rabbit hole. And then I found a quote to go in front of my rabbit hole. So do your rabbit hole first.
Okay.
And then I'll do my rabbit hole because my quote goes to my rabbit hole.
My rabbit hole. So I have two things. First, a shout out. There's one of our listeners told us about a video of someone reading a book of one of Jean Hersey's books. And she's a lost lady of garden writing. So we'll put a quote of her. But my real rabbit hole is I discovered flower pounding. Have you done this, Dee?
I have not done flower pounding. And I saw your story on Instagram and I was like, that was cool looking. It looks like a little watercolor.
It does. And so it's pretty simple. And they say it's very good to work with children because it teaches them, how to use a hammer and blah, blah, blah. So you basically put a flower upside down on a piece of watercolor paper, or I just use scrapbook paper and put wax paper or something over it and then pound that sucker in and it leaves an imprint on the paper. So it looks pretty nice. I'll have to do some more and put some more on my Instagram, but it would also be
I can't do it.
Why not?
You're going to think this is so dumb. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
It looks like, it hurts the flowers.
Oh, for crying out loud. I
know.
You're so sappy.
Sometimes, yeah. But that's why you like me. But I'm glad you're doing it because it is cool.
Well, it would be very cool to make a garden journal with pounded flower images in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or you could just press them.
No, the pounding. It's so much simpler.
Okay.
Anyway, Now you do the quote that you have for your rabbit hole. And I am going to pound more flowers.
You can pound them all you want to. I'm not judgmental of other people. I just can't do it.
I can't believe you think it hurts the flower.
Well, anyway.
What about when I felt whoa, little miss flowers have feelings? What about all those Rebecca Goldsturms that you're ripping out like nobody's business. You don't think those are squealing a little bit when they get them roots pulled out of the ground?
Yeah, but I don't like them, so I don't care.
All righty then. Do your quote.
I think I fell in love with gardens because that's where I felt safest as a kid, out in our yard with my father. That was Julie Newmar. And Julie Newmar sent me down a rabbit hole because I was watching CBS Saturday Morning, because they almost always have some good, what do they call that? Interest stories.
Feel good content.
Feel good content.
Uplifting.
And I need some feel good content in my life. And so Julie Newmar is 89 years old, and she has lived in the same house for over 30 years, like me. And she has the most beautiful, amazing garden. It's full of at least 80 roses. And there's also an article about it in Better Homes and Gardens. And in Better Homes and Gardens, she said, there was a quote from it where she said, "I believe in a small house, big garden. Who wants to take care of all that indoor stuff?" And I had to laugh out loud because it's exactly how I feel. And she also arranged her landscape so that she and her adult son, John, who has Down syndrome and lives with her, can easily tour the gardens in a motorized scooter. So, and she's hands-on, even though she gets help because she's 89 years old. She has always had this garden. And throughout her long career, she started out as a dancer. She kept her little home base with her garden.
That is very interesting.
Pretty cool.
And we'll link to the YouTube channel that you found. She's on YouTube.
Right. I found a YouTube channel. She hasn't posted on it lately. And then you asked me, did I catch it when the journalist interviewer said, "Isn't there a drought going on?" And she laughed and basically said, "Yes, there is." And that's all she said.
Yeah, because 8,600 square feet. Now, 8,600 square
that
feet.
Isn't big.
That is not a big garden. It makes it
it's just jam packed.
It's jam packed. So,
oh my gosh, ferns and roses and irises and peonies, and it's a pretty small garden, really. So she has that one wall that has a gate with mirrors on it to make it look larger. So there's a lot of cues to make it look really large, and it was just super abundant. And I doubt if she uses that much water, because unlike people think, perennial gardens often take less water than grass.
Yes. Oh, definitely. And I'm thinking an acre is what, 45,000 square feet?
Right. And hers is 8,600.
So about a fourth of an acre. If
right.
That. So, and then I found I looked at that and I said, oh, and then on CBS Sunday Morning, they have Martha Stewart planting her new rose garden. And she gave it.
Yeah, I haven't watched that yet. I'll probably go watch it after we get off, because I record that show. And she talked about the book we talked about last week, The Color of Roses. We were ahead of Martha.
We were.
Go us.
Now she has help. She's planting over 200 roses, I think. And she's got them in that grid pattern, just, a big square plot with roses on, 3 feet on center or whatever. She's doing a lot of prep to plant her roses. So we'll have to talk about that sometime, because the best advice I ever got on roses is they're just a shrub, plant them. And
and that's what I talked about when my deadheading one. I was like, the thing you have to remember about roses is there's a couple of things. In the grid pattern, I'm shaking my head, because the whole grid pattern idea of rose growing arose out of the fact that you had to spray roses for fungal diseases and for pests back in the day, because most people grew hybrid teas, which were not disease resistant at the time. They are more all roses are more disease resistant now than they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So that is a very old fashioned notion. And all the prep she's doing, they are heavy feeders. But if you have good garden soil and then you just feed them either once a month or with a long acting fertilizer in the spring, depending upon how you grow them.
Yeah.
It's just, they're just not that hard, and people make them look hard. And Martha, as you know, Martha always overthinks everything. So I can't wait to go watch this.
Well, she's planting floribundas, hybrid teas, and shrub roses. So you go watch that. More on that next week. Let's do our garden commissions.
Yeah, because we are way over time.
What are you doing this week, Dee? This week?
I'm going to, starting today, because I've got some help coming out. And I'm going to keep pulling weeds and keep pulling out those overabundant self-sowers and self-spreaders, most of which have underground stems. And then I'll be mulching some, which I'll probably do next Friday a little bit. I just kind of mulch now as I go, because I'm also doing that method where I cut things back in the spring and leave the stems there if it's something that doesn't spread disease. Cutting back the blasted asters that, to half size. So that's the Chelsea chop. And then just pretty much that'll be on repeat. And then I might sow a few seeds in here and there because I did some of the zinnias indoors, but I'm also sowing some. And also some cosmos. What are you doing?
So ditto, I'm pulling weeds. Ditto, I'm mulching as I go. I need to sow my zinnias and sunflowers now that I got the bed prepared. The bird feeder up front, I've been putting that off, such a mess, but I have a plan to put some stones under there to keep it less of a mess. And then if I have time between that and mowing and everything else, I'm thinking about hauling out all the houseplants a few at a time and giving them a good cleaning, scrubbing their pots. If they need up potting, doing that, or they need just some fresh potting soil on top. Some of them then may spend the summer outside, but most of them will come back inside. So that is it. And then there's a few that it's like, ooh, you're just not really making it. So you're going to go bye-bye.
I've tossed a few because you know what? It's not like you can't find more.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes they get sick and they're just not well and they need to go. I think that's it.
All right. Well, let's wrap this baby up because we have talked on and on and on, but we hadn't really talked for a while. Thank you for listening to The Garden Angelist. I hope you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. We publish every week on Wednesdays at 12 a.m. Eastern Time.
If you listen to Apple Podcasts, we love a 5-star review that helps us get noticed by others. Could you also share our podcast with your friends? Word of mouth is still the best way to get the word out there.
And be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, plus links to our own websites.
And be sure to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, The Garden Angelist, at substack.com, which is also linked to in our show notes.
And if you want to help support us, use those affiliate links. If you buy something after clicking through on them, we're in a small commission and it costs you nothing. Or you can set up a monthly subscription through Buzzsprout or make a one-time donation through PayPal. And thank you to those who have done so.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the Garden Gate today. Bye until next week.
Bye, everybody.